people can see you around the world. Actually, sitting here with the Brahmacharis from ISKCON Melbourne. If you say Melbourne, people, they really don't like it here. It's Melbourne, Australia. So maybe you can introduce yourselves. Just say your names. You should be able to see yourself here on the screen. Oh, wait, what is it telling me? If you end this live video, you'll choose if you want to cancel. Okay. Here, can you see yourself? If you can see yourself, they can see you. So introduce yourself.
Hare Krishna, Dvija Pitambar Das.
Hare Krishna, Manamohan Das.
Hare Krishna, Arjun Sakadas.
Hare Krishna, Sanjeev.
Hare Krishna, Gopal Deshna.
Hare Krishna, Param Brahma.
And who am I? Anyway, so we're going to have a little Brahmachari talk. So if any of you would like to be Brahmacharis and leave your families, or I'm just kidding. That's old ISKCON. We don't do that anymore. So, no questions from any of you? Yes.
I'm reading Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, and the science of soul is described. The individuality of the soul is being established. Krishna explains that never was there a time when ideas is not you. In the purport, there's a statement which talks about empirical universe. So I couldn't really get the point about if individuality and trying to establish individuality, that point about Krishna is beyond the empirical universe.
You have to show me an exact quote. Otherwise, it's just, this is what he's asking about. Chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about the empirical universe, the individuality of the soul. Yes, we need a specific quote. If you can provide me that, then yes. Oh. While he's looking that up, anything else? Yes.
Maharaj, this in the Bhagavatam says that one who is serving.
You come and ask your questions so everybody can hear it.
In Bhagavatam mentions about how if we are serving Krishna, then one is not obliged to, any other duties or responsibilities of.
Yeah, you don't have to stop at red lights.
But one is not obliged to doing the individual service to the humanity or to the demigods. So when we are trying to serve Krishna full time and trying to serve our spiritual masters full time, but then there's still a lot of obligations that we have in terms of that we are taking a lot of services from a lot of fellow devotees from the society, and is that, and sometimes we might not be able to serve back, or many times we are not able to serve those individuals that we're taking service from. I mean, we are.
Okay. I hope you all heard that. We have to have also some common sense. It's just like, for example, in society, let's say there's people who are, everyone gets their reward. For example, let's say you go to a park, and there's some people that work in the park or maintain the park and get paid a salary, or even some people that may do volunteer work. For example, in every society, some people do volunteer work in various ways to help other people or to help public facilities, whatever. And you may not know who that person was. But if you do your duty, then everyone benefits. The idea in a society is that if everyone does their duty properly, everyone benefits from that. And it's a cooperative effort. And so it's just not possible in this world to personally thank or reciprocate with or even know all the people that do things that benefit us. For example, you're walking down the street and you're breathing oxygen, let's say put out by plants. So you could stop and personally thank all the individual plants, and so it's the nature of social life that, of course, we thank people that we're aware of, but in general, if we do our duty, if we do the right thing, because every duty is made in such a way that it benefits society. And if your duty doesn't benefit society, you probably didn't understand your duty very well. Just like, for example, let's say parents are raising a child. Then if they raise their child very nicely, that child will cooperate, become a useful member of society, won't commit crimes, and so on and so forth. And so, pay taxes, do their duty. So every duty, real duty, benefits other people. Just like if you look at the description of the Varna system in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 18, where the Brahmins have what's the description of the Brahmins? Anyone remember that? Shamo Dhamakta Paksho Chang Shanti Arjuneva Cha Jnanam Vijnanam Astikya. So, but a Brahmin has Brahma Karma Svabhaja. A Brahmin is meant to teach or to guide people in religious activities. Kshatriya is meant to govern, to protect people, provide for the needy. The Vaishya is productive, producing everything society needs. The Sudras are assisting everyone. So the whole social system, and any functional social system, means that every person who is mentally able and physically able is not a parasite, but is acting for the benefit of others. And ultimately, we are all servants of Krishna. And so the person who helped me is ultimately serving Krishna, whether they know that or not. Because all service, and therefore Krishna says, Bhoktarang Yajnata Pasang, all austerities, all sacrifices, whether ritualistic sacrifice or just making a sacrifice for a higher cause, that he's the enjoyer. So ultimately, all our activities are service of Krishna, and everyone is within Krishna. It doesn't mean that we should be rude. Like if someone does something for you, you can say thank you. So in ordinary affairs, we should be grateful, but we can't. It's humanly impossible to either know or thank every person that ever helps us. If we serve Krishna, then our account is clear. Did you find that?
Yes.
Let's see.
It's in
Let me see.
2.12.
Yeah, come here to the people who are in this room. Let's see. Which part of it are you? If individuality refers to the empirical universe, then there's no need of teaching. In other words, if we're only individuals as long as we're in material bodies. Is that Shankar's position, that as long as you are a conditioned soul in a material body, you're individual, but when you get liberation, you're not an individual. That's what it's talking
So empirical universe
about. Means the physical universe.
Then there's no need for teaching by the Lord. So
In other words, if we're all God and we're not really individuals, then why teach someone that doesn't exist? Shankar's philosophy, I mean, we really look at it just in terms of ordinary logical philosophy, it really doesn't make any sense at all. And the fact that so many people thought it was a good idea just is a testimony to Kali Yuga. Because philosophically, it really doesn't go anywhere. What Prabhupada is saying is that if it's only by the influence of Maya, as long as you're in a material body, that you think you're an individual, then, but if you're really not an individual, if you're really God, then why teach God? And that would be silly. But then again, if you are God, what are you doing in a material body? It's all nonsense, really. I think only in Kali Yuga can anyone take that idea seriously. That probably accounts for why we don't see any strong impersonalist teacher earlier in Indian history, because I guess earlier people had common sense. So, any question about Brahmacari life? Glorious Brahmacari life? It's nice, so simple. The simplicity of it is really one of its attractive features, Brahmacari life. Because when someone gets married, then they're called Adhikari. And Adhikara means right. And so adhikara is right. So adhikara means one who has a right, namely the right to, I guess, complicate their life, the right to have their own establishment, because brahmachari life is communal. I mean, at least in the old days, brahmacharis didn't have like big bank accounts, or I don't know what's going on nowadays. But at least back in the days when Prabhus were Prabhus, back in... I was a brahmachari. Of course, I was young. I was a brahmachari from 1969 September to till I got married. Around February, early February of 1971. So I was a brahmachari for 17 months. And then I was a grihastha for about 17 months. 15 months, actually. Grihastha for 17 months. No, brahmachari for 17 months, and grihastha for 15 months. And now I've been a sannyasi for 46 and a half years. So I guess that's what I was meant to be. Yeah, I've been a sannyasi for almost 2/3 of my life. So brahmachari life, just a few words on brahmachari life. One can be so strict that one becomes very vulnerable. It's like when Cortez invaded Mexico on behalf of the Spanish monarch, and of course probably mostly on behalf of his own greed. And millions of native Mexicans, Aztecs, and people from other tribes, they died because they didn't have any antibodies. And the Spanish brought all kinds of diseases, not to speak of cultural diseases, but they also brought actual medical diseases, and the local people, native people, had no antibodies. And so one can be so protected from the outside world that one has no antibodies and actually becomes more vulnerable. And then, of course, the question is, at what point are you being vaccinated? At what point are you being poisoned? And so, up to a certain level, it's a vaccination. After that, you're being sort of fatally poisoned. So, but it's, brahmachari, the secret of brahmachari life is not just to, it's not ignorance, it's knowledge. Give an example of how ignorance led to problem for a great brahmachari. There was a brahmachari called Rishyasringa. The story's in the Mahabharata. You know that story. Rishyasringa was like a super brahmachari. His father was determined that he would never get married, never fall down into sex or whatever. And so his father never told him there were even two genders. So he grew up and he was practically a young adult. He didn't even know that there were two genders. He thought we're just people. As far as where does people come from, why worry about the details? So then there was a kingdom nearby that was having a drought, and the Brahmins studied and then said, only this Rishyasringa has the Shakti, the power to save the kingdom. Only he can do a sacrifice which is needed to save the kingdom, but his father would never let him come into the city. So the king sent some of the most attractive young ladies on a mission, and they were very clever. They waited until the father was away doing something in the forest, and they went there. And, they were very nice. Hello, sir, how are you? And then they sort of gave him a friendly embrace. And he actually thought they were men. I mean, he had no idea there were two genders. He just thought they were men, but although he did notice that their bodies were a little unusual. Their bodies kind of had an unusual shape. I thought they were just men with an unusually shaped body. And so they embraced him. He thought they were just being nice, friendly people embracing him. And then he said, How curious, I'm feeling such pleasure in this embrace. Anyway, to make a long story short, they got their man. And so they packed him up and took him back to the city. We'll throw them all out. Throw all these out. Oh, you're actually recording. Oh, so, yeah, so ignorance, real Brahmacari life is based on knowledge, not on ignorance. And it's also, and by ignorance, there are two kinds of ignorance. One kind of ignorance is just having no idea what the other half of the world is. And the other kind of ignorance is, how should I put it, sort of working oneself up into a type of determination by sort of telling very dark stories about family life and about, how horrible it is to be with a woman or something. And that also doesn't work because it's not real. There are definite advantages to Brahmachari life, and there are some rewards in Grihastha life. And so the right reason to remain a Brahmachari is because a person is by nature a Brahmachari, or at least at a particular point in their life. It's not necessarily a lifelong commitment. For some people it is, but at least one should come to a rational decision that at this point in my life, this is the best situation for me. And by rational decision, I mean not based on an unrealistic or exaggerated view of the alternatives, but a realistic view. And for some people, based on a realistic understanding, Brahmachari is the best life. It's the best life for them. For some people, it's the best life for some time. It's interesting because, again, at a certain stage of life, when you're young or a young devotee, it can be a very powerful way to focus on Krishna, focus on service. So it's, I think my Brahmachari days were some of the happiest days of my life. So it's interesting because, say, for example, in the Bhagavatam, for a Brahmachari to get married is not given as a fall down, but as a natural progression for most people. So that in the universal form, just like when both the Varnas and the Ashrams are mapped onto the universal form. So in the case of the Varnas, the Brahmins are the head, Kshatriyas the arms, Vaishyas the waist, Shudras the legs. So in the ashram system, the Brahmacharis are the legs because they serve. They're serving the other devotees. And then the Grihastas are the waist. So, what did I just say? I got that wrong. Brahmins, the head, Kshatriyas, the arms, Vaishyas. No, I did get it right. See that? I should never ever think that I made a mistake. It's the only mistake I ever made is sometimes thinking I was wrong. Just kidding. Is he really kidding? Or is he actually a narcissist? Anyway, so according to the Bhagavatam, for most devotees, but whether you are most devotees or whether you have your own path, that's something you have to decide. But for most devotees, there's natural progression to become fixed up as Brahmachari and then to become Grihastha. To say that most devotees do that doesn't mean that you should do that. It's just, and again, one has to know oneself. There's no substitute for real self-understanding. And so how do you really understand yourself? Requires a certain amount of integrity, honesty, self-honesty. And of course, if someone is proud, then they may take sort of an exaggeratedly, they may take an inflated version of themselves as that's who I really am. On the other hand, we should not be sort of we should not be self-deprecating. In other words, one has to have the maturity and the intelligence to be able to look inside and really figure out what our position is. So yes, the rational reason to be a brahmachari at a certain stage of life is because it's the best position for your Krishna consciousness based on a mature self-understanding and an analysis of the alternatives, what service you want to accomplish at a certain stage of your life, and so on. Then you come to a rational decision. So that kind of decision can be sustainable. So any questions on these topics about brahmacharya life? Oh, come forward so people can hear you. This is your chance to be a star.
Krishna, Maharaj, you were mentioning about taking those antibodies and so taking the vaccine, but also at the same time making sure that it's just the vaccine and not putting poison in. Can you elaborate a bit more?
Can I elaborate on that? Well, to be successful in Krishna consciousness, a devotee must be able to objectively monitor their own situation. It requires a certain integrity, self-honesty, like I said, to look at yourself and try to see yourself as you really are. At the same time, one should not demand perfection. Like you may not, in fact, it's very likely you're not a perfect brahmachari. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be a brahmachari, or at a certain point in your life, it may be Krishna's arrangement or the best thing for you to move on to the next ashram. So again, everything has to be decided intelligently, not fanatically, not out of self-deprecation nor excessive pride, but simply being sober, intelligent, looking at the options, and deciding what's best for you. And there are certain people, they're not the majority in most societies, who are, so to speak, born brahmacharis. And they really find themselves in that ashram. Most people, for most devotees, brahmachari life is very valuable. It's a very precious, valuable time of life. And at the same time, they may move on to another ashram later. But having a good brahmachari life, or a good brahmacharini life, even though we don't have brahmacharinis here, it's an extremely valuable period of life if one, by circumstances, is able to live that life. For example, people who join the movement already married don't really have that option. But by circumstances, one is able to spend some time as a brahmachari or brahmacharini. It can be an extremely valuable stage of life. For one thing, it's easy to be humble because everyone's telling you what to do. So that, brahmacharis, a brahmacharini, it's simple life. It's very simple, and one naturally is serving. So it's a very nice life. It's a beautiful life. Like I said, even Krishna was a brahmachari, but then he sort of graduated. For example, in the school, if you go to school, you study, and then you graduate. And brahmachari life is like that. Some people, they graduate, but their natural vocation is to teach. So they stay in the school. And so in the same way, brahmachari life is, so to speak, student life. It's a very nice, simple life, completely focused on Krishna. And then some brahmacharis will find that they've found themselves. This is the life I want. And probably most brahmacharis statistically, doesn't mean most of you, but in general, most brahmacharis will benefit from the Brahmacari life and then go on, I don't want to say the bigger and better things, but they'll just work their way through the Varna system. Yeah, I have very happy memories of my Brahmacari life. I remember one time I was working, Satsarupa Goswami was our temple president. I was Brahmacari. Prabhupada sent me to Boston, actually, from Berkeley to work on his books. And I was Sankirtan leader, temple commander. So one time we were driving back from Harinam Sankirtan in the van, and we got a flat tire. I was just absorbed in reading the book. I was in ecstasy, just reading one of Prabhupada's books, and I really was ecstatic. And so the van stopped. We had a flat tire. I was reading my book, and then Satsarupa said, "You're the Sankirtan leader. You have to do something." So I just said, "Does anyone know how to fix a tire?" So one other Ramachari raised his hand. I said, "Okay, please fix a tire." And I went back to my book. Also, I remember when I was in Boston, I have a god sister who's a very dear sister. Her name is Rukmini. She's the wife of a Nutama communications minister. Anyway, she's a very well-known devotee, an outstanding Vaishnavi. So we were both young, and I was 21, and she was probably younger. And she was the head pujari, and she ran a tight ship. And so because of course the pujaris depend on the kitchen, they have to make the offerings all the time. So, and I was a temple commander and Sankirtan leader. So if the kitchen didn't do their job properly, or if, let's say, a devotee meant to do an offering at a certain time, didn't show up for some reason or anything like that, or someone didn't buy the cotton for the ghee wicks, whatever it was, Rukmini would say, "Hridayananda." She started coming. We were all young. It was like brothers and sisters. She started. And so I was really attached to reading Prabhupada's books. I think at that time I was reading Sri Upanishad. I was studying it. I remember as a Brahmachari, I would read, like I'd read one sentence, and I wouldn't go to the next sentence until I'd realized that sentence. Not only read it, but I wanted to actually realize it and see it. Everything Prabhupada was saying, I had to actually see it deeply. And then I'd go to the next sentence. So I was very attached to studying, and so after lunch every day, I think it was, I can't remember, I would just leave the temple because I knew if I stayed, I'd be called for something. I didn't really care. I was determined I'm going to read. And so, just about a block away from the temple, that was in Alston then, which is just west of Boston. It's Boston area. It's the Boston area, but just west of Boston, and also just on the other side of the river from Harvard. In fact, the Harvard Business School is in Alston, and now they're building a huge tech center, biotech and digital, and all that. Interesting, because traditionally Harvard would, of course, they do science too, but they really focus on the humanities, and then just literally a couple of miles down Massachusetts Avenue is MIT. They would handle, the tech and the engineering and all that. But the way the world went, nowadays you got to do everything. So actually MIT is very strong in the humanities. Now Harvard is literally spending billions of dollars on their tech center, digital engineering, because when they do it, it's Harvard, so they can't just, can't be a sloppy or, second, third grade thing. So when they decided to do it, they just started throwing billions of dollars at it. So anyway, all that new stuff they're building is in Alston. So the temple was in Alston, and so right about a block from the temple, which was a beautiful old house, Victorian house. I think someone told me it originally was a funeral parlor. From darkness to light, from death to eternal life. Anyway, so I would walk about a block down the street, and there was a Catholic convent, where nuns stayed, and it wasn't just a building, they had a beautiful campus. We just had a house with a backyard, but they had like beautiful grounds, like beautiful green grass. They must have had, at least maybe 3 acres of land. Do you do acres here? Yeah, at least maybe 3 acres of land with a beautiful building. It was like heaven, because we were always in this temple and, so many devotees. And so I would walk over to the convent, and it was, there was our street, then another street parallel behind us, and the convent kind of was, had all the space between those 2 streets. So I would just walk through, and it was so beautiful. I'd read these Upanishads. It was like heaven, because we were either downtown, the Boston Commons or in Harvard Square, just doing Harinam right in the middle of the city, or I was in the temple, people yelling at me, and I had to do this, do that, and Rukmini, Hridayananda Maharaj. No, not Maharaj, it was Brahmacari, but so I would just leave. I just left, and I would just read. I'd walk there reading, and then when I got to the convent, this beautiful campus, I would just read, and then come back maybe an hour or 2 later, really blissful, and then Rukmini would say, "Where were you? I was calling." We still joke about this, actually. So that was in 1970. Holy cow! That was it shows the influence of this movement, because Robin said to Batman, "Holy cow!" Really shows the influence of the Hare Krishna movement that Robin said, "Holy cow!" Anyway, what else happened when I was a Brahmacari? Something else I was going to tell you. My Brahmacari life. There was the studies, and of course, certain things like stealing Mahaprasadam. In those days, they would offer, the temple would offer for Mangalarti this sweetened condensed milk, which I can't eat it now. I can't digest it. But back then, when I was 21 years old, oh my God, it was the way, the truth, and the light. And so they said they needed someone to transfer the deity plates after Mangalartis. So I volunteered, and then we would transfer the plates in the prasadam room. And after Mangalarti, a lot of the women in the temple, at least like 8 or 9 women, would go in this really nice prasadam room, and they would prepare the garlands for the deities. And I had to transfer the plates right there. So my task was very simple. And that is, I had to steal the sweetened condensed milk right in front of them. And they were looking at me like, "Go ahead, punk, make my day." They were just like, "Don't even think about it." One interesting thing about that time in ISKCON was that this is both in the Berkeley temple where I joined, and I served for about 8 months, I think, until Prabhupada sent me to Boston to work on his books. And then I stayed in Boston about another 8 months, actually. 8 months in Berkeley, 8 months in Boston. So that was like, well, to show you that I'm really good at math, that was 16 months. And what's interesting is that in both those temples, ISKCON back then wasn't like it became later. Women were not Maya, and no one thought men are better than women. It was just like a natural family. I mean, when I was growing up, there was no like women are this or men are that. It was just a nice family. And the temples were really like that. This is both in Berkeley, which had about maybe 18 devotees, and then in Boston that had maybe 50 or 60. It was the biggest temple in ISKCON back then, because it had ISKCON Press. That was before the BBT. And yeah, there was nothing like that, like women are Maya or men are Maya, and there were no fall downs. I mean, that was 16 months. There were lots of men and women. I can't think of a single case where someone broke the principles or even almost broke the principles. I mean, I don't even think there were near misses. It's just everyone was really just thinking of Krishna. And so in that sense, it was a very nice time. Anyway, so that's why I say, because I was a Brahmachari, and also we didn't call women Mataji, thank God. But by the way, if you read the Bhagavatam, see how many times a man calls a woman that's not his mother Mata. Just make a list. It's going to be a very short list. You won't need much paper or ink. So, I mean, so many things we say, well, that's Vedic culture, really? And then why don't they do it in the Bhagavatam? Anyway, people actually have names, amazingly enough. And there were certain terms that were used for women. They're used, like in the Bhagavatam, for example, Bhadre, from the word Bhadra, which just means like good lady, or Shubhe, fine lady, or sort of woman. It's just, respectful terms, but mother. Anyway, make a list. See how many times, see how many you find where a man calls a woman mother when it's not his mother. It's interesting because, of course, we have Chanakya, who says, Mata Vatparadadeshu, one should see literally other men's wives as mother, but of course Chanakya is not Shastra. Anyway, so the reason I remembered all this is because we say so many things are Vedic culture, it's just unfortunately not in the Vedas. But it's because back then there wasn't anything like, who are you? You're a woman, you can't talk to it. There's nothing like that. We were all equal, and they were just looking at me like, don't even try it because you'll be very sorry if you do. But of course, I was determined. And I actually developed this really good technique for stealing. I only stole about half of the sweetened condensed milk in the deities every day. So that was liberal. It's just funny. I would take it all, and they were just watching me. I mean, God, were they watching me? And so I'd just take the sweetened condensed milk, put it in the other plates. And the last time I would go like this, but I wouldn't let go of it. So I had literally a whole fistful like this of sweetened condensed milk. And then I would that was the last one. I do that last, I'd pick up the tray and then walk over to another room to clean it with my, they never caught me actually. So, yeah, very happy times, Brahmacari. I just remember when I think of my Brahmacari life, I remember just thinking of Krishna. Just thinking of Krishna and meditating on Krishna's presence everywhere, preaching. And it was a very happy life. It was a very happy life. And then I was married, actually. The arrangement of the temple president, his wife, I was married. Interestingly, I was given a very good wife, excellent devotee, and I always think that was Krishna's arrangement because, clearly I was meant to be a sannyasi. Pity the poor woman that had to live with me her whole life. But because if by Krishna's arrangement I'd married a wife who was not a really good devotee, or not a good wife, then I took sannyas when I was 23 years old. And so, it actually, having a really good wife actually helped me in my sannyas life, because I knew that if that wasn't really for me, even with a very good wife, because otherwise one could think that if I would have had a good wife, I might have been happy. And I could see how, especially if someone takes sannyas when they're very young and several years before their brain is even fully formed physiologically, right? Those are the days in ISKCON before you even had a full mature brain, you took sannyas. Because the male brain doesn't, if it ever matures, it's not until a few years later. And also my wife, I went, of course, to ask Prabhupada to give me sannyas, and then he ultimately left the decision to her, which I knew he would, because a friend of mine had asked Prabhupada for sannyas, and Prabhupada asked his wife, and she said no, and it was just like, I guess in ISKCON you can't say no cigar, but so I knew that actually I couldn't take sannyas without my wife's permission, and so we talked for days. We just talked, and she's a very good devotee, still a very good devotee, and so then Prabhupada, yeah, he agreed, and I think in my case, it may not be for everyone. Everyone's different. In my own life, I think having gone through that natural progression, I was a householder for 15 months. But I think having gone through that, it made me more determined to be a sannyasi. But of course, everyone's different. For another person, that may not be the case. Yeah, those were happy days in ISKCON back then. I mean, there's still happy days because Krishna's still here, but somehow or other we have to create happy days for more people. And that's the real point of this movement, it's the Sankirtan movement. Parang Vijayate, Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. That begins Chaito Darpana. I'll just translate that one verse and then we'll end with that. Chaito Darpana. Darpana, of course, means mirror. Chaito Darpana, the mirror of the mind, because the mind reflects everything. So Marjanam. Marjanam, of course, means cleaning. Cleaning the mind mirror. Because if a mirror is dusty, you can't see properly. So it's like, for example, imagine if you're driving your car and the windshield gets all fogged up, which actually happened a couple of years ago. A year or two ago, I was driving through Arkansas. I was driving out of Little Rock, Arkansas. It was pouring rain, and I made a mistake. Did I just say that? I turned on and the windshield started to fog up a little bit, so I turned on the, what do you call it, the defogger. And I made a mistake. I thought because it's cold outside, I won't turn on the air conditioning, I'll just use the air. But with that, the whole windshield just fogged up very quickly. Not only the front, the back, I mean, all the windows. The only slight difficulty was that I was going about 120 kilometers an hour on a freeway with about 4 lanes of traffic, and I couldn't see anything, which, could be a problem if not dealt with promptly. And so I had to put the window down, and then I had to get over. I knew I had to get over and stop the car, and there were like trucks honking at me. It was amazing what Krishna saved me. Anyway, getting back to the foggy mirror of the mind, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. So the grammar, or not only grammar, the syntax, just the literary construction. Lord Chaitanya's first verse is really ingenious, because it starts out with these neuter sort of verbal nouns, like cleansing the mirror of the mind. That's all it says. Cleansing the mind mirror. Chaito Darpana Marjanam Bhava, material existence. It's interesting because Bhava in Sanskrit literally means becoming. And so because in the spiritual world everything's eternal, it's only in the material world that things come and go. Therefore the word becoming comes to mean the material world, the world of becoming. In other words, a world where things aren't eternal. So Bhava Mahadavagni, the great forest fire of becoming, literally. The great, in other words, birth and death. So Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, extinguishing. It's interesting because nirvana means, of course, extinction of illusion. Of course, there's always the illusion of thinking the goal is nirvana, but what I always say is that Krishna used the term Brahma Nirvana. Nir in Sanskrit is a negative prefix. I mean, by negative doesn't mean it has a bad attitude. I mean, in the sense it literally means without. So nirvana means without vana, which is the current of material life. So what I put is, how can you have as your highest perfection the absence of something? Because ultimately the perfection should be the presence of something, not the absence of something. Anyway, the word nirvapana is the causative form. It just means bringing about nirvana, which means extinguishing, bringing about the extinguishing of the great forest fire of the world of becoming and dying. Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam Shreya Kairava. This is really beautiful. Shreya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam. And it spreads. Vitaranam means spreading the Chandrika, the moon rays of Shreya Kairava. Spreading the moon rays unto, or the blue lotus of well-being. Kairava is a night blooming lotus flower. And so when the moon rays hit the Kairava, when the moon rays hit this lotus, the lotus opens. And so in that way, the Sankirtan movement is it is spreading the moon rays that open the lotus of Shreya, of true well-being. Very beautiful, isn't it? Poetic. Shreya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam, of course, means spreading, expanding. And then, Chaita Darpana Marjanam, Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, Shreya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam, Vidyavadhu Jivanam. And it's sometimes translated the life. It literally means like the living. It is the living of the bride of knowledge. Vidya in Sanskrit is a feminine word, which means Veda, basically knowledge. Vidya and then Vidya Vadhu. They still say in India, Vada Vadhu, don't they? Which means groom and bride. And it's interesting they chose the word Vada for groom, because Vada means a choice, which indicates women had some freedom. Like Swayamvara, one's own choice. Anyway, so Vidyavadhu is, of course, a metaphor, the knowledge bride. Jivanam, like bringing to life the knowledge bride. And so knowledge is compared to a bride because we have to marry ourselves to wisdom. We have to embrace wisdom. And therefore, wisdom is compared to a bride. And but the bride has to be enlivened. She has to come to life and embrace the husband. And so wisdom embraces you when you're engaged in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. This means the bride of wisdom comes to life. Vidya Vidhu Jivanam. And then Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam. It is the increasing, expanding of the bliss ocean. And Prabhupada always said the ocean is already so big, but it expands. Govardhanam, Govardhan, means that which prospers the cows, which expands the happiness of the cows. Govardhana. And here, Anandambudhi Vardhanam, expanding the ocean of bliss. Anandambudhi Pratipadam. Prati in this case means each, like at each step, Pratipadam. Pratipadam Purnamrita Swadanam. It is the aswadanam, it is the relishing of Purnamrita, the full nectar. Purnamrita Aswadanam, the relishing of the full nectar. By the way, swadu, we still have in English. Swadu, the English word is sweet. So, Purnamrita Swadanam, but and then Parang Vijayate. Oh, oops. Sarvatma Snapanam. It is the bathing, because snana, means bath, and snapanam means bathing someone. Snanam just means bath, and snapanam means bathing someone. So, Sarvatma Snapanam, that Lord, the Supreme Lord, is just giving a bath to all his kids. We're just kind of little, don't smell so good, they're a little dirty. So it's a very interesting word chosen here by Lord Chaitanya, because it's like if you're a father or mother and your kids are all dirty, you have to bathe them. And so in the same way, Lord Chaitanya is bathing the kind of the smell, the conditioned souls, all the souls, sarvatma, every soul, snapanam. Sarvatma snapanam parang. And it's interesting because the word parang, but if you look at this verse grammatically, it really consists of that's what you do. If you look at this verse, it actually consists, grammatically, it's very beautifully constructed. It consists of a series of neuter nouns, all ending in anam, which are marginam, nirvapanam, vitaranam, jivanam, vardhanam, snapanam, and sankirtanam. Oh, someone just asked a question. 1 second. Okay, I'll get to that. There's a question which I'll answer, but because this is what Lord Chaitanya has done poetically. He's taken the word sankirtanam. We say, of course, in the West, we say sankirtan. You probably heard that if you're in the Hare Krishna movement. The Sanskrit word is actually sankirtanam. Sang means together in Sanskrit, so it's together kirtan, like together glorifying Krishna. So he's taken the word sankirtanam, and then he's constructed this whole first Shikshastika, which is the longest one, using that same type of neuter noun. So we have marginam, nirvapanam, and they're all the same grammatical form as sankirtanam. He's kept this parallel construction. And so parang, grammatically, can refer to all these different words. In other words, it is the supreme cleansing of the mirror of the mind. It is the supreme extinguishing of the forest fire of material existence. And it is this supreme expanding of the moonshine, which opens the night blooming lotus. And so for every one of these, parang, it's the supreme of each one of these. And all these different little phrases are exactly parallel grammatically to sankirtanam. So parang vijayate Sri Krishna sankirtanam. And so literally that means Sri Krishna sankirtanam conquers, is victorious. So it's a very beautiful verse. If you look at actually the Sanskrit composition, it's literally like divine coming. So here's a question someone asked on chat. Hare Krishna Maharaj. Hare Krishna to you. Srila Prabhupada a few times quote Chanakya Pandit saying that all women except one's wife should be addressed as mother. You mentioned this is not the case according to Srimad Bhagavatam. However, Srila Prabhupada says that this way to view women and dress them is civilization, even specifically Vedic culture. Are we not then to follow the same standard? Well, Prabhupada didn't follow the same standard. It's the first rule for anyone who actually understands anything about Prabhupada that it's dangerous to take one statement of Prabhupada or even a few and to take that as the final word if you haven't looked at everything else Prabhupada said on exactly the same subject. And so Prabhupada in his own dealings did not follow this, and we would hardly say that Prabhupada was being uncivilized when, as in fact, most of the time, he didn't call women mother. Certainly when Prabhupada met, let's say, non-devotee women or even his own disciples, most of the time, he didn't call them mother. So who would say Prabhupada was uncivilized? As far as saying Vedic culture, something is Vedic culture if it's found in the Bhagavatam or in the Vedas. And so Prabhupada, it's not a question of rejecting Prabhupada. It's a question of, or something Prabhupada said, it's a question of following Prabhupada's instruction that we should use our intelligence, we should read his books, and ultimately we should come to a reasonable conclusion. Personally, I take very seriously, as Prabhupada did, actually Prabhupada taught me to take it seriously, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Now, it's common among many devotees not to take Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra seriously because you can't understand Shastra without Prabhupada, and we don't jump over Prabhupada to other sadhus. And so therefore, our system becomes simply whatever Prabhupada said, although Prabhupada discouraged this himself. And so it's a question of, to be a good follower of Prabhupada, should you believe what Prabhupada said about himself or what other people say about Prabhupada? Because sometimes you have to choose because they're saying different things. In fact, Prabhupada says very clearly, and not only once, that there's Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, but the highest authority is Shastra. See, there's something very dangerous if you say that we can't understand Shastra without Prabhupada. I mean, but the point is, Prabhupada explained Shastra. It doesn't mean that I can't read something in Shastra and I simply can't, I can never understand Shastra. What Prabhupada means there is that Shastra, and this is what Bhaktisiddhanta Jiva Goswami wrote a book on hermeneutics or epistemology, which means how do you understand Shastra and what is our system of knowledge. It's a book called Tattva Sandarbha. It's one of the 6 Sandarbhas, Shat Sandarbha. And he explains there that our highest authority is the Bhagavatam. So without Prabhupada, I could never have understood the Bhagavatam. The point is, I did accept Prabhupada, and I have dedicated my life to serving his mission. And by his mercy, in a, let's say, in a relevant sense here, I can understand the Bhagavatam. I am able to understand it. It doesn't mean I have the highest realization. It doesn't mean I'm on Prabhupada's platform. It simply means that I know what our philosophy is, and I hope you do too. And so therefore, without Prabhupada, we could not understand Lord Chaitanya's teachings. But we did accept Prabhupada, and we do understand the teachings. And so therefore, when we come to some specific detail, the highest authority is Shastra. Because if we don't do it that way, then our basic claim as far as what makes ISKCON special collapses. Prabhupada said over and over and over again that the difference between this movement and other movements, which were in the West then, is that we follow bona fide Shastra. Prabhupada constantly made this point. Now, what if someone comes and says, actually, the Bhagavad Gita teaches impersonalism, and you say, well, look at this verse and look at that verse, and the person says, well, you can't understand it without hearing from a self-realized soul who happens to be my guru, and so therefore you cannot jump over the guru to Shastra. and therefore don't quote Shastra because you can't understand it. What are you going to say to that person? And what if that person says, well, that's exactly what you do. You don't care what Shastra literally says. Whatever your Acharya says, that's the truth. And you don't really care very much what's in your Shastra. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, which is an old saying. A gander, by the way, is a male goose. So very dangerous. If you want to go down that path of saying that it doesn't matter what it says in Shastra, it's just whatever Prabhupada says, then we lose probably our most important distinction. And when people come along and speak all kinds of nonsense and claim that's the Bhagavad Gita, you really don't have much to say to them. So I prefer to hear Prabhupada about Prabhupada, not somebody else about Prabhupada. And when we listen to Prabhupada, what he says is that he is speaking infallibly when and only when he is actually repeating Shastra. And that Prabhupada also says a pure devotee, and Prabhupada is clearly a pure devotee. Prabhupada personally told me that he was never a conditioned soul. He personally told me that privately. So a pure devotee is not materially infallible or omniscient because he's not God. And to attribute to Prabhupada material omniscience or infallibility is basically to say he's God. It's like coming through the back door, but saying Prabhupada is God, which he wouldn't appreciate very much. In fact, Prabhupada thought the idea of his being omniscient or infallible in material things, he thought it was just a foolish idea. And just shows that, he even said this, it shows you don't understand what it means to be a pure devotee. And so how men addressed women hundreds or thousands of years ago in India is not Siddhanta. It's not a basic philosophical principle like we're not this body. Krishna is God. There's a law of karma. We can escape karma and return to Krishna by bhakti yoga, as Krishna teaches it. That is called Siddhanta. Just local customs of how people addressed each other, that's not Siddhanta. That's just not, it's not a basic philosophical principle. And therefore, on those things, and on Siddhanta, of course, we accept Prabhupada. On details of just, cultural details, we have to take Shastra. And we find in Shastra that it was not the custom that men addressed all women as mother, except their wife. So in coming to that conclusion, I'm following Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave us a very clear set of instructions about how we deal with Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And although some people tell me I should do it another way, I prefer to do it the way Prabhupada taught me. Because the way Prabhupada, not only me, the way Prabhupada taught us is actually our culture. Prabhupada once said if the Guru asked for water, don't bring milk, so I'm not going to bring hermeneutic milk. Let's see, there's another question here. Questioned your live lecture. This is from Perentreas in Germany. How did this Mataji addressing custom become a standard that nearly everyone in ISKCON feels obliged to follow? Well, in 1970, Prabhupada made his very triumphant return to India with hundreds of his Western disciples and launched what has become by far the most powerful branch of ISKCON, namely the Indian branch of ISKCON. And it was to some extent a double-edged sword. I mean, of course, it was glorious because Prabhupada established his movement wonderfully, and it's only grown since then. So it's you know, it's by far the most successful yatra in the world, by far, is ISKCON in India. The other side of it, the unintended consequence, is that, in my view, looking at it as a historian, it sounds pretentious to call oneself a historian, but since I went to college, I would say practically since 1970. Since starting in 1970, a process began, which was the Indianization and even the Hinduization of the Hare Krishna movement. And I saw it. I mean, I saw it step by step. For one thing, for example, when Prabhupada took his disciples back to India, on the one hand, people in general were just like wildly enthusiastic. On the other hand, they were also much more critical because they were really watching Prabhupada's white elephants, as he called them. They were really watching these Western devotees to see if they were, sort of vegetarian mlechas that chanted Hare Krishna. In other words, do they wash their hands after they eat? And do they behave properly according to Hindu customs? And so therefore, to avoid criticism and to avoid, some type of sort of inadvertent missteps in external things by his Western disciples, Prabhupada began to get real heavy about certain things, like you have to, we always washed our hands after we ate, but Prabhupada got very heavy about only eating with your right hand, and heavy about things like, if someone bows to you, this is what you do in return. In other words, he was training his disciples, Western disciples, to preach in India without making fools of themselves. But what happened is those disciples, who were all young and immature, began flooding the Western temples with letters and communications that Prabhupada said we have to do this, Prabhupada said we have to do that. And we were all young and immature. And all of a sudden, in these temples that were going very nicely, there were all these new things we had to do, which of course came straight from India. And then as more and more devotees actually went to India, and Prabhupada built Mayapur Vrindavan, and devotees started moving there and living there and retiring there, and ISKCON just became increasingly, ever since 1970, and it hasn't stopped. It has become increasingly Hinduized and Indianized. So now in many temples they celebrate Shivaratri, for example. I mean, Lord Shiva is a great soul. Lord Chaitanya personally would visit Shiva temples in South India. So, it's not about Lord Shiva. But we just probably never had us do that. He never had us do that. But now, Shivaratri, there's even one temple in North America. It's a nice temple where they advertise in every newsletter, like they have Brahmins who will bless your car, your business, your motorcycle, maybe your new computer. Like, you want it blessed, we'll bless it. Just, get out your checkbook. It's kind of like rent a puja. And so even like you see things that never existed before, like let's say devotees, let's say they go to some ISKCON event or even just somewhere else, even if they're not wearing the dhoti and sari, which ISKCON imagines as devotional dress, as if there was ever a time in the history of India where someone who wore a sari was a Vaishnavi just because they wore a sari, or someone who wore a dhoti was a Vaishnava because they wore a dhoti, as if there was ever a time in Indian history when that was true. But even, let's say, if they go somewhere they're not going to wear dhoti and sari, the so-called devotional dress, they'll wear some kind of Indian clothes. They'll wear those shirts the guys wear that come down to your knees, or just like, okay. And for the women, it's like, it's like but just go Indian. And so there's nothing wrong with Indian culture. There's not a criticism of Indian culture. It's just I'm pointing out rather socio-psychological, historical fact that ISKCON developed, I would say, a type of Indian, this is not the Indian devotee, actually some of them it is, a type of chauvinism. For example, I spoke to a sannyasi recently who we were discussing, Krishna West and all my crazy ideas. And he said, well, you saying like a dhoti is Vaishnav dress and pants are not. And the reason is because people that wear pants don't wash them. You know, this is a very respected senior sannyasi, whereas people that wear dhotis do wash them. Somehow, if you have pants or something like some shakti in the pants that prevents you neurologically from deciding to wash them, which sounds very dangerous, actually. I plan to throw all my pants out, but so, or that, and then of course there's the, I mean, if someone wants to wear a dhoti, that's great. I mean, it's a free country, at least here it is. I mean, wear what you want. But the idea that devotees try to give, it's kind of, what's the word, to be honest, pathetic. Like trying to give, you know, pseudo-rational arguments like simple living, high thinking. So a dhoti is very simple, much simpler than pants, probably because it takes about 10 times more cloth to make and probably about, you know, much more difficult to wash and dry and very difficult to do practical work with it. You know, I mean, if you really have to get out there and do a job. And yet it's, so again, I mean, it's not about, I mean, people do what you want, but I'm just saying, so ISKCON, I'm answering the question actually by Parang Shreyas, and I think in ISKCON, not everyone and not everywhere, but I think there's a huge amount of, I think the right word for it is just Indian chauvinism. Indian chauvinism. The idea that somehow all things Indian are better than all things non-Indian. And even if it requires a really comically absurd argument. So again, I personally am giving my life to Prabhupada and Krishna, so it's not like I don't want anything from India. But the point is that chauvinism means, I mean, the definition is to have sort of like an irrational enthusiasm. Actually, I'll, oops, wrong one. Let's see, here's my little dictionary. The Apple Dictionary is English as being one of the worst English dictionaries on earth. Let's say a chauvinist, a person displaying an excessive or prejudiced loyalty or support for a particular cause, group, or gender. So it's exaggerated, which means that you say something's much better, but on any possible objective grounds, it's not. Or exaggerated or prejudiced. In other words, it's not based on facts, like someone has come to their judgment before prejudicial. One has come to their decision before they've actually examined all the evidence. So again, getting back to the question of calling women Mataji, in Prabhupada's own example, he didn't do it very often. And but there's also a strong thing in ISKCON, although no one talks about it, but still, I'll give many examples, that to choose Hindu custom over Prabhupada's direct example and instructions. So somehow you get kind of this sleight of hand. You have this thing where if you are very, let's say, ethnically Indian or just follow Hindu customs, then you're really following Prabhupada, even if Prabhupada didn't follow those customs. So somehow if you follow Hindu customs and reject what Prabhupada actually did, you're being loyal to Prabhupada, which is an example of irrational chauvinism. I'll give you an example. There's an idea in ISKCON that you chant Gayatri mantra, you cover your hand. You ever heard of it? Now, we have many pictures of Prabhupada brazenly exposing his hand to all the hobgoblins in the universe while chanting Gayatri. So everyone ignores, I mean, I just like, anyway, it's just amazing. It's who needs television when you got stories like this? It's there are these creatures or beings, demigods, whoever they are, that sort of float around the universe, and as soon as you go to chant Gayatri, they like target you. Somehow, imagine they're so powerful, they can be millions of miles away, they can be in a different planet, but they know you're chanting Gayatri. That's how powerful they are. And then they can actually go through your hand. They actually can subtly penetrate your hand, go into your subtle body, unlock the sort of the warehouse of your accumulated piety and just plunder it. So that's pretty powerful. I mean, you couldn't do that. You don't know if someone on another planet is chanting Gayatri, and you can't actually subtly go through their hand into their subtle body. I mean, you can't do that. And yet these people with all these fantastic cosmic powers bounce off cotton. They can actually penetrate the human anatomy, but they bounce off cotton. They also presumably bounce off silk, and they also bounce off left hands, but they can penetrate right hands. And then we, tell this to the public and say, this is a spiritual science. People are going to think you're nuts. They may be right. And so another one is that you can't go on the altar with stitched clothing. You ever heard that one? Now, Prabhupada did. We have pictures of Prabhupada with a kurta, which is obviously stitched, installing Radha Krishna deities, worshiping Radha Krishna. But again, there's this sort of this unthinking assumption among many people in ISKCON that the more Hindu you are, the more you're following Prabhupada. Even if Prabhupada didn't do the thing you're doing. Even if Prabhupada didn't do it, even if you're not following Prabhupada, still the higher principle is the more Hindu you are, the more you're following Prabhupada. If this sounds irrational, it is. So, for example, if you look at all of Prabhupada's letters, all his room conversations, in fact, most of the time, Prabhupada did not call women Mataji. Look in the Veda base. Most of the time, Prabhupada did not call women Mataji. And yet, if you do that, even though Prabhupada didn't do it, then you're following Prabhupada. Even though it's not in Shastra, and Prabhupada didn't do it most of the time. He did say sometimes this is Vedic culture, but it turns out it's not really there in our Shastras, and Prabhupada himself didn't do it. So, someone else wrote here. Yuga Avatar Das asked, Dear Maharaj, so in the Sampradaya conception, there's the idea of a mantra that empowers. So Gayatri mantra is normally how devotees excel and mature. Now, H.D.Goswami never took the Brahman initiation or followed the normal process. So even Bhakti Vinod, I understand, never got Brahman initiation. Saraswati Thakur also never followed the same process. The holy name is potent. So in your perspective, how do we understand that we have joined this Indian Sampradaya? Well, I wouldn't. It's a Vaishnava Sampradaya. Some people are doing their best to Indianize it, but it's ultimately a transcendental Vaishnava Sampradaya. How does the mantra dictate or control the essence of the line? Does it dominate the essence, or is it about accepting the spiritual conclusion of the previous acharya? What is the essence of our spiritual essence? Courtesy of Prabhupada. Is it the mantra Gayatri? Is this Siddhanta? Okay. First of all, it's a detail. Obviously, it's a detail. And different acharyas may teach in different ways. So Prabhupada introduced a 2-tier initiation system, and as a self-manifest great acharya, he has a right to do it. And if Bhaktisiddhanta did something else, that's his business. So the common principle is not doing every detail the same. The common principle is following the great acharya that Krishna sent to you. And so in that sense, we are following. And perhaps I'll end this topic with a quote from Prabhupada, if I can open my Veda base here. Now I'll get it somewhere else. You have a question? Oh, you have to pay extra for that. I just read one more thing. Let's see. Go to database. It's amazing. Actually, we're doing this program and I can just go to database. Prabhupada in his purport to the Bhagavatam 4.8.54, 4th canto, chapter 8, text 54. Prabhupada says, and this is not meant to offend Indians, by the way. Let me just read what Prabhupada said. Sometimes our Indian friends, sometimes, it's not like every Indian says this, sometimes our Indian friends puffed up with concocted notions. Indian friends, these are friends, but they're puffed up with concocted notions, and this may be also newly minted Indians or people born in the West who have identified themselves as somehow Indian. Sometimes our Indian friends, puffed up with concocted notions, criticize this has not been done, that has not been done. But they forget this instruction of Narada Muni to one of the greatest Vaishnavas, Dhruva Maharaj. One has to consider the particular time, country, and conveniences. And here's the kicker, here's the line. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. And so the test, the Prabhupada says, those who are not actually in the line of acharyas or who personally have no knowledge of how to act in the role of acharya unnecessarily criticize the activities of the ISKCON movement in countries outside of India. The fact is that such critics cannot do anything personally to spread Krishna consciousness. If someone does go and preach, taking all risks and allowing all considerations for time and place. This is Prabhupada. If someone does go and preach, taking all risks and allowing all considerations for time and place, it might be that there are changes in the manner of worship, but that is not at all faulty according to Shastra. So that's the answer to that question. So again, we need to keep all of Prabhupada in the center of ISKCON. All of Prabhupada. Because unfortunately, some people keep in this, or want to keep in the center of ISKCON, a very conservative Prabhupada, as I always say, whom they have made in their own image. You find that sometimes people, devotees who are themselves very conservative, they kind of create a very conservative Prabhupada in their own image. But actually, I just quoted Prabhupada, and I've written papers. If you look at everything Prabhupada says, he definitely has a conservative side, and he also has a very liberal side. And he authorizes us just to do whatever it takes. Of course, it doesn't mean changing our philosophy. It doesn't mean changing our spiritual practice. It doesn't mean going outside of ISKCON. It just means doing what's practical. So basically what I've been trying to do with my Krishna West thing is I'm trying to show everyone, look, let's look at all of Prabhupada. Let's look at all of Prabhupada's statements. Because Prabhupada, what he really cared about is saving the world. That's the only reason he came to this world, was to save it. And why else would he come here? So, any other question?
Earlier you were also telling that we have to see, not take just a statement of Prabhupada and quote or something like that. And also maybe Prabhupada written something and he spoken something different totally on that subject matter, or different places, different things happen. But then here, we see that because you said lastly that Prabhupada want to save and preach and things like that. So the contradiction, is it because,
Paradox, not contradiction.
okay, paradox, and is it because the level of the devotees and maturity and things like that, and they're not going to see the higher picture of giving some Krishna conscious to others or something? Is it one, or is it because they want that cooperative mood that okay, fine, the difference is there, but then we want to cooperate and operate in one way.
Of course. Well, cooperating doesn't mean only one way. In fact, for example, let's say you have a family. And there are different members of the family. If you try to make everyone the same, it'll destroy the family. You keep peace in the family by respecting everyone's right to be themselves. That's how you keep peace in a family. And so, of course, if someone says, thank you so much, and I want to be a serial killer. No, I mean, obviously there are limits. There are limits. We're not talking about immoral acts. We're not talking about criminal acts. And so in ISKCON, among devotees who are committed to Prabhupada, committed to ISKCON, and accept our philosophy and practice, there's variety. And Prabhupada himself constantly was fighting to protect devotees from that kind of oppression, where one devotee thinks that one leader thinks everybody has to be like me, or all my followers. I have disciples who like the traditional Indian method, and I don't have a problem. They have a right to do that. It's not that because I'm a guru, everybody has to be just like me. That's not my job as a guru. It's just like if someone's a father, the father's duty or the mother's duty is not to make all the children like little cookie cutter versions of themselves. Parents who are like that are not good parents. Of course, you want your child to be healthy, to be safe, stay out of jail, make something of yourself. Don't be a bum. The parents want to see the child have a successful life, but not trying to make all your followers like you. You all have to think exactly as I do on every point. Doesn't sound like a very good parent, does it? And same goes for gurus, frankly. And I should not misuse my position as a guru just to force everyone to be like me. That's not my job. My job as a guru is to help my disciples best I can to love Krishna and to serve Krishna under Prabhupada's authority. And there are various ways of serving Krishna. So I can't misuse my position as guru to simply coerce all my disciples to be like me on every detail. Because some things are just details and some things are basic principles. I want to read you a letter from Prabhupada. Not a letter, actually probably is a letter. It's a statement from Prabhupada. Here's Prabhupada's statement, and this is a letter to Karandar. He wrote on December 22nd, 1972. Prabhupada wrote the letter from Bombay. He's explaining what the purpose of ISKCON is. Is the purpose of ISKCON that everyone for the rest of your life, you just, like the fifth sinful activity is thinking? Or is there some other purpose? Here's what Prabhupada says. Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful, and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. Once there is bureaucracy, the whole thing will be spoiled. So what does Prabhupada mean by bureaucracy? He explains what he means. There must be always individual striving and work and responsibility, competitive spirit, not that one shall dominate and distribute benefits to the others. They do nothing but beg from you, and you provide. So I'm not saying, don't follow your ISKCON authority, leave the temple, do whatever you want. That's not the point here. I mean, obviously, we can't have a movement unless we cooperate. We do our duty. There's a hierarchy, and we try to, follow bona fide instructions. So this is not a call to anarchy. But the point is that if someone is working under me, let's say a disciple of mine, my goal as a guru or as a leader, whatever, GBC, whatever I am, my goal is to help that person to become autonomous. Not to try to keep my disciples in a permanent state, like a childlike state, so that I can have a disciple 30 or 40 years old who don't do anything without my permission, like don't sneeze unless I tell you can sneeze. That's not the point. It's just like, let's say you go to a doctor because you have some medical problem, and due to that medical problem, you're not really free to live the life you want. So the doctor tells you, eat this, don't eat that. The doctor gives you a list of orders, but the purpose is not to subjugate you. It's exactly the opposite. The doctor wants you to be healthy so that you can be free to have your own life again. So a bona fide guru is instructing the disciple not to keep the disciple in a permanent state, like childlike state, where no matter how old you are, even if you're an adult, you're never really an adult. The whole point is to help the disciple come to a point where the disciple will be creative and independent, not independent in the sense of rejecting the guru. I mean, because a guru wants a disciple grow up, be an adult. So Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent. Independently thoughtful and competent. And not that one person makes all the decisions and distributes benefits. Prabhupada said that will ruin ISKCON. So again, this is not a call to anarchy. This is not a call to give up your services, go back to the temple and say, I'm not following you anymore. That's not the point. But it should be clear in our relationships, either whether it's guru, GBC, or whatever authority one has, that we are trying our best to help the people under us to grow up, to be adults, to become autonomous, and hopefully autonomous, but still devoted to our mission. Autonomous doesn't mean that you abandon the mission, or that you don't cooperate, or that you give up teamwork, that you leave the team. It simply means you're an adult. And of course, that's the goal. So how long it takes someone to become a spiritual adult, but that should be the goal. And so when you get all these little details, like Bhaktisiddhanta said this, and Prabhupada, Prabhupada is certainly an adult. He's Prabhupada. He's a founder Acharya. So Bhaktisiddhanta in his time, he did what was best, and Prabhupada's doing what is best for us. These are details. Taking details and trying to, and saying that these are fundamental principles just means one doesn't understand the spiritual science. So, maybe we'll end here. I have harassed you enough, I think. Yes.
Just going through Yamuna Mataji's book.
Who? Oh, Jamuna, yes.
And
initial days, in 73, 74, she's also bringing this point out that women were very equally treated before and now that.
It's probably a little earlier than that. By
She
73.
mentioned 73, she
Okay.
can feel the heat of it.
Yeah.
The book she's mentioned.
She was also, yeah, in America, yeah, it depends on where you were in the world
She
also.
was serving in Vrindavan that
Right,
time,
right.
she could feel that,
Yeah.
and she started putting herself on the back foot to deal with Prabhupada directly, which she was doing before. Because she
And
felt-
Prabhupada defended her, though. There's a famous story where, very famous story where someone, I don't know if it was Prabhupada's godbrother or Brahmin, whoever it was, came and Jamuna was there, and he was sort of criticizing, like implicitly criticizing Jamuna's cooking for Prabhupada. Sometimes he's bringing the prasadam, there's no one else in the room. Prabhupada strongly defended, not only defended Jamuna, but defended the way he dealt with her. And he said that Jamuna would give her life for me and I would give my life for her. I mean, Prabhupada was a gentleman. For example, there's another famous story. These are from the books that they were going to a program in India in the early days. And so devotees had to travel by train, which in those days was not like a really fun thing to do, the train in India back then, especially if you were going second class. And Prabhupada insisted that all the big sannyasis and GVCs take the train, and the women came in his car. He was a gentleman. Actually, the cure for lust is to respect women, because you don't try to exploit what you respect. And so it's funny, it's like to call women mother, which is, again, not in Shastra, but to call women mother and then to treat them as subordinate, I mean, you're doing a lot more harm by looking down on them than any good you're doing by this Mataji word, which is not in Shastra. You're doing a lot more because after all, what is lust? I mean, psychologically, not physiologically, but psychologically, what is lust? It's the desire to lord it over a woman if you're a man. That's the pleasure of it. The man, wants to subjugate, lord it over the woman by exposing her, by dominating her. And so looking down on women as somehow less is the path to lust. It's just another form of lust. And so, some devotees probably say Mataji, but they really think women are less than them. And that's the path to lust. That's the fast road, the fast track to lust. Whereas a man actually respects women, and again, it's not that to respect a woman you have to call her mother. It's interesting. I find the whole idea kind of, interesting. Because obviously the strategy behind calling women mother is to transform any type of lust into incest. The worst kind of incest. And so the way you keep men and women off each other is that you threaten them with the incest taboo. Because it's incest, if that's your mother. And personally, maybe it's just me. Again, I'm not saying everybody has to think or feel like I do. I'm just talking now how I feel personally as an individual. I just don't like being threatened with incest. It's just, I feel like you don't need to do that. This is a spirit soul. This is a Vaishnavi, or if it's not a Vaishnavi, this is a soul that belongs to Krishna. And I just don't like people always pushing this like incest thing in my face. I just personally don't like it. And I also feel that my relationship with most women is not that they're my mother. And if a girl's, one half my age or a third of my age, it doesn't seem like she's my mother. Or someone's my sister, she's not my mother, she's my sister. God sister. I mean, I have many really great God sisters that I've known, for most of my life. And they're sisters. They're not my mother, they're my sisters. And my disciples I really feel they're like spiritual daughters, not my mothers. And I feel that girls who are disciples of other gurus are my spiritual nieces. They're not my mothers. And so this is, again, just me personally. There's just, for me, there's just something contrived and just unreal about it. And I think, I mean, at one time I was with Prabhupada actually in San Francisco in '74 when he came for the Rath Yatra. We were sitting in his room. It was Prabhupada, myself, and the temple president. The temple president was kind of bragging to Prabhupada that after Mangal Arati, they make all the women leave the temple room so the men, brahmacharis, can chant. Prabhupada looked at him like, are you crazy? And then Prabhupada said, why do you do that? He said, well, the men get agitated. So the men won't get agitated. And Prabhupada was like, he was almost like disgusted. He said, are they like, it's like, are they so uncivilized that they're agitated because some Vaishnavi is chanting Hare Krishna in a temple? He said, let them go to the forest if they're so agitated. In other words, the men should leave, not the women. And so someone just sent a quote in. Let's see. No. We're sending things in. I guess not. So anyway, to each his own. I'm not trying to, tell. I just think that it's just my view. My view is it's not in Shastra. Prabhupada didn't do it most of the time. I personally find it a little strange, and I think probably many Western people will find it a little strange. And so that's just my view. Every Prabhu for themselves. Okay, here's something. That Brahmachari rules and regulation are there in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that he would go door to door for collecting alms for the spiritual master and dress every woman as mother from the beginning. Well, guess what? Brahmachari life in the Bhagavatam means elementary school. It's like when you're 5 years old to 12. So if you're like literally a child and you're going to the women in your neighborhood, yeah, you can say mother because you're a child. Brahmachari, the Guru Kula, which the Bhagavatam is describing, is elementary school. So again, there's no need to go over this again. I've explained already about Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. I've explained about Prabhupada's own personal activities. And so just, getting this quote or that quote, I can give you 1,000 quotes where Prabhupada says the ultimate authority is Shastra. So we're not going to make progress just by one more quote, because there's too many other quotes that say the final authority is Shastra. So that's, I think, really the point. And it is a detail.
On that.
Yes.
So later part you see this slide, what Mother is talking about, and then in the initial years, what I've seen through the book, that they were encouraged, whether it's men or women, they were dressed in saris, and she would make sure that she's always wearing nice sari, because that's what, according to her, what she's actually saying is Prabhupada would be very happy to see her in sari. So is it that Prabhupada was trying to adjust to time, place, and circumstances which they were able to accept, and then...
Okay, so the question, Prabhupada, Jamuna said that Prabhupada was pleased to see her in a sari. First of all, when Prabhupada came to America, especially when he went to San Francisco, the hippie citadel, women were dressed very unchastely. And Prabhupada, it was kind of shocking for Prabhupada to see people, women publicly dressed like that. So he said, like, put a sari on, cover up. And, but again, another thing is, you talk about 73, 74, the movement was booming then. So why change it if it's working? And the point is, for the last 40 years, the movement's been declining. Yes. So therefore, if Prabhupada came now and saw his greatest achievement, his greatest happiness, which was this expansive, powerful, relevant Western Hare Krishna movement, and he saw it basically just the remnants, little remnants of what once had been a powerful movement. It's absurd and outrageous for anyone to say, I know what Prabhupada would say. That if Prabhupada came right now and went to temples and saw them so radically different than what he left, that he would just say, keep doing the same thing. Don't change anything. In fact, what we cannot find is a single instance in Prabhupada's life where a particular strategy wasn't working and he kept using it. There's not a single instance in Prabhupada's life. He went to Jhansi, and that was the plan. League of Devotees, that was the plan. It didn't work for various reasons. He went to Delhi, started giving out his Back to Godhead sheet. Didn't work, at least not the level he wanted. Okay, someone told him you need books. He went to Vrindavan and wrote the Bhagavatam commentary. And then gave it out to famous people in India. Still wasn't working. So he got on the boat. He came to America. He went to Butler. That wasn't working. He went to New York. When he got to New York, he was with Dr. Mishra. That wasn't working. So then he left Dr. Mishra, and then finally things started working. This is Prabhupada's life. He started the In God We Trust political party. I was with Prabhupada. There was a time back then when he was most inspired by that. We would go on morning walks, and every day it's all he wanted to talk about. The In God We Trust political party. And then it started, and he started to see how devotees were starting to get distracted from the main mission, so he stopped it. It had been, it had inspired him more than anything, but he stopped it because he saw unintended consequences. You can give many, many letters from Prabhupada, heavy, heavy letters, how every little child has to go to our Dallas Gurukula. And then if Prabhupada had been here to see the evil that went on there, there's a lot of good that went on. There were many very devoted people that gave their lives for that school. But still, there was evil there. There was poison there in the form of child abuse. And if Prabhupada would have seen his movement almost destroyed, not only by losing a whole generation of Gurukulis, the people that Prabhupada said are the future hope of ISKCON, just losing a generation. And then seeing, the publicity, the legal cases, and we almost lost our temples. You think Prabhupada would have said, well, no, just keep doing the Gurukula the same way? Do you think he would have written the same letters insisting that everyone send their child to Dallas? So we can't be like little children. We have to be able to think. Prabhupada needs us to be adults. Prabhupada needs us to think. And Prabhupada needs us to restore his Western mission. That's what he needs us to do. Not just be parrots. So if something's a basic principle of Bhakti Yoga, then don't mess with it. Otherwise you void your warranty, from Prabhupada. But if something's just a detail, and sometimes Prabhupada says this, and sometimes he says that, and it's not in Shastra, then there's every sign that it's a detail and not a basic principle. And Prabhupada says over and over and over again, you adjust the details to spread Krishna consciousness. You don't mess with the basic principles. So we have to think. If we just look for quotes and counter quotes and counter quotes and don't actually think, we're not going to be able to make this movement successful. So, thank you all very much. And hope I haven't inspired any of you with the desire to be an anarchist. Oh, the devotee sent that in. No need to apologize for the quotation. And what I said was certainly not directed against you. And so no problem. Please don't think for a moment that I'm speaking against you in any way. I appreciate your service very much. I was just, speaking in general. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you all for listening and participating. And hope to see you again soon, despite my polemical nature. Hare Krishna. So now